And not just our world opens up because we get invitations to things, but our world opens up because we are showing up differently. We have a posture of take me seriously. I'm the new sound of power. That is a posture that is world changing.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Happy almost end of December. I hope that you've got some rest and relaxation on the horizon for you. I know it's been a stressful year, and if you've got a senior who is still working on applications, this is peak stress. So I'm sending you all the good vibes that I can muster. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine who wrote a really fantastic book. Her name is Samara Bay, and she is the author of Penguin Random House bestseller Permission to Speak, which is a love letter to anyone about to open their mouth. It is out now, available in 15 and more countries. She is an LA-based speech coach whose clients range from candidates for US Congress to C-suite executives, change-making entrepreneurs, thought leaders, Hollywood celebrities, and high school girls. She's a lot of fun to talk to. And one of the reasons I think her work resonates so much with mine is because she's all about really helping people take stock of what their real voice is and accepting it and understanding that the world is a place where we've had to change that voice or change how we show up to survive, to get by, to fit in. But the more we can recover that voice and just stay aware of how we're showing up, the more powerful we will be. And that is so true in all realms, and especially I think in the realm of college admissions. There's a lot that students feel like they have to negotiate away, hide, or maybe kind of downplay in their academics or their college journey, that actually takes away so much of why they are special and unique and powerful. So I was excited to bring Samara in to talk to us about her work and her thoughts on mentoring young people. And I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I had recording it. Samara, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited for this conversation. Literally every conversation I have with you, I feel like we get into this dynamic where like we excite each other more and more and more. And we get gigglier and louder, and it's just so wonderful. So I'm really excited to do this in a recorded medium.
Thank you. Same. Hi.
So I, want to start with having you tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get to where you are today? And maybe actually start with where are you today? And then we'll talk about the journey to it.
I am in Eagle Rock, California. Very literal answer to your question. East Side LA. I like to call it the Brooklyn of LA. And I am wrapping up the year when my debut book came out. That feels like the other like location that I'm in right now. And the story of how I got to this moment is obviously a lot, but specifically, I don't know, I like to think about 8 or 9 year old me because I have a kid that's that age now. And that was around the time that I was watching My Fair Lady, the musical about a flower girl with a technically lower class accent. And this dude comes along and he's like, wait, I'm going to make a bet with my pal, with my rich pal who's a colonel, that I can give you a fancy accent and your world will open up. And he does. And it does. And I think honestly, what like social analysis was I doing when I was 8 and first introduced to this? I obviously cannot say, but I can say that I think having an 8-year-old now, kids are learning the world pretty aggressively at that age. And I think I definitely got real curious about this connection between how we sound and how we get treated. And in a way, my book is that.
What an origin story. Okay, well, where do we go from 8 years old?
Well, I think my first entry point, probably for a lot of kids who like musical theater in their pre-teens, was, oh my gosh, I should become an actress. In fact, becoming Eliza Doolittle, getting to play Eliza Doolittle, the flower girl in question, was a huge goal of mine for years. Never happened, but, still available if anybody is casting. But at the same time, around 9, 10, my parents started taking me to the local Shakespeare festival. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California. There's a university associated with it was this insane outdoor redwood Shakespeare festival with these modern productions and modern clothes and like the music of Blondie and these professional actors who were being jobbed in from New York and from San Francisco. And I was just sitting in these audiences with like the fog rolling in and the lights picking up the magic. And I was like, this is this, whatever this is me. And I did really everything right in order to become a professional actress, except that, it's not guaranteed, as it turns out. And one of the weird things that I did, which I think ties into what we're talking about here, is I was desperate to go to Brown University because I thought it was the perfect combination of both academic and also artsy. And I didn't get in, and I got a full ride to UCLA and a parking spot. I got into Vassar and I got into Princeton. And I found it very, very hard to turn down Princeton, even though it did not on its surface seem like the right place for me. And it's not where people go when they want to become a professional actress. I mean, that seemed like the writing was all over the place on that. But with tears in my eyes, I said yes. And, I found my people there. And I also discovered the hard way, I think, but discovered that when there is no academic or institutional support for theater, by the way, it's a little different now, but back when I was there, you make it and your friends make it and you discover how to be producers at the same time that you discover how to be a performer. And that served me quite well when I was then in New York. And then I ended up getting an MFA in acting at Brown. So there was some sort of poetic justice there.
You made it.
And I made it after all. And the producing side of me, the like, let's put on a show, let's ask donors for money. Like, let's just, let's do the hard thing of actually making something from nothing, I think has served me quite well, and as an entrepreneur now. And then, the other part of the story that is the what happened next. After all of that, I was in New York and I was getting really close on things, and just callbacks does not mean that you get a job, as it turns out. And it was heartbreaking, and my 20s were heartbreaking in this way that like there's no cultural sort of agreed upon heartbreak for just the like death by a million paper cuts. And at the same time, I had these mentors coming out of the woodwork who were all dialect coaches, which is really a fancy way of saying putting accents into people's mouths and helping them through the process of sounding different. And I was like, listen, as a side gig, this is better than waiting tables. I'm doing it in addition to waiting tables, to be clear, but this is better than waiting tables. And those mentors just saw in me something that I didn't quite see, which was like, it's actually quite a rare skill to be able to understand the science, the International Phonetic Alphabet of these sounds, but then also the humanness of what it really is to turn a collection of sounds into a story of a life, which is what all of our words and sounds coming out of our mouth are. They reflect the life we've actually lived, right? With the accents and the places and the people that have influenced us. So I did that, and I moved to LA and I became a dialect coach for movie stars, and it was a really good run. And then in 2018, at the height of a whole lot of political drama in the US, I discovered coaching first-time female candidates for office leading up to those 2018 midterms, and my whole life shifted, and the book and everything has come since then.
And then you wrote a book.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just a little thing? You're like telling us all the other stuff, but you wrote this book that is pretty monumental and is the reason we met in the first place. I heard you kind of give a talk on it, and yeah, I'm obsessed. So I know you talk about it all the time, but tell us a little bit about the book and what are you trying to do with it?
Yeah. Listen, what I learned when I was coaching those first time candidates for office is that they are exactly who we want in leadership. They are the solution to the problem of leadership. But I also knew why I was there, why MoveOn.org, which was the organization that had connected me to them, found me and found a few of us and started pairing us up. Because sometimes magnificent people who deserve all the power have trouble showing up magnificently in the moments that matter, in front of a microphone, in front of a whole lot of people, on a stage, on a camera. Like the real act of showing up in those moments, of being deeply human and unapologetically weird and caring, like all of your emotional juiciness at the surface. We can all think of the billions of reasons why that has not historically felt safe for any of us, right? We grow up in households that say, some version of you're better seen, not heard. Or if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Or your emotions aren't welcome here, which is not what's said out loud, but big, big, big tears, big righteousness, big anything, right? Big enthusiasm, even, is sort of beat out of us in school, at home, for all kinds of reasons having to do with, both sort of what we consider to be civil society. And also specifically if we're women, if we're people of color, if we're queer, if we have an accent that codes as not from around here, we are doing everything we can to not seem different or to hew to some standard. And so this sort of all hit me as I was coaching those women. And I was like, no one actually talks about this standard. I'm just going to name it. I'm going to call it the old sound of power and offer that we actually are exposed all around us to people who represent the new sound of power. But if we don't have language to talk about that and to share it with each other and to name it and to, not just recognize it, but like if it has instructional value, what's the instruction? it passes us by. And to get really specific, what I mean is like literally when you feel the urge to share something online because it's somebody saying something and they just like are so human. Maybe it's an artist that you love winning an award and saying something like weirdly vulnerable, or maybe it's a person, right? Just a regular human like us, speaking up at a town hall or in some capacity asking a question, like something that doesn't seem like it's a quote unquote leadership move. And yet in the doing, they're like owning that moment. That's what makes us send videos. Like that's what makes speeches go viral. Boring speeches don't go viral. And yet we have all been taught in so many ways, literally and through action and through don't say that like that or no one will take you seriously. We've all been taught to do the boring version. And it doesn't serve us. It doesn't build the world we want to live in. And I wrote this book to be like, there's another way.
And I love the book because, well, it's great content, number one. It's very validating. It's got this wonderful mix of structural analysis and like real humanness, I suppose.
I think of it as like how to and also like a cultural reckoning, but like also how to.
Yes. Yeah. It is very accessible. And there are like practical exercises in it that you're kind of coaching us through. And I think one of the main reasons I love the book speaks to, the message that you are also trying to give is that it sounds like you. It sounds exactly like you. I hear it in your voice whenever I read it. And it's such a wonderful model of how powerful that is. I'm sure there are books written on voice bias, and I'm sure they're extremely boring and dry. And I'm sure they don't take the advice that they're, trying to give, but yours totally does. And in that way, like,
Well, or even to be generous to them, if not boring and dry, academic, right? There is just this, the people who know the term voice bias, first of all, like slightly made it up. The more agreed upon term is accent bias. And I just wanted to expand it. But accent bias is like super foundational in the sociolinguistic world. So linguistic institutions around the country, and not every university has a linguistics department, but the ones that do, okay, great. So that's a thing. And they write about it. And they're amazing. I mean, linguists are so cool. Sociolinguists specifically, which are the ones that like get me excited because they're like, how do we all learn how to talk like us? What does like us even mean? But I was like, we got to pull some of this into the mainstream because this is social justice work and it does not work if it's inaccessible.
right, right. Which is why I think this book is great. And I think, it's great for all kinds of people and all age groups, actually, which is why you're here on this college admissions podcast. And I know you do a lot of coaching of young women around leadership and showing up as their full selves. And I want to hear a little bit about that. And then we're going to go into some other juicy topics that you and I were talking about before we hit record. So tell us.
Yeah, even as you say that, I just want to like asterisk. I'd be happy to do this with more boys as well. I just spoke at my kid's school for the fifth graders, which isn't even his grade, but the theater teacher there, fascinatingly, was doing a unit on theater of the oppressed. So basically, political theater for fifth graders, where they're going to write their own short plays on like a policy issue that they'd like to see changed. But so she had me and a local politician woman who I know come in and talk about like what it is to actually be an activist out loud. So not, how to get involved and community organizing, but this whole thing of like, what does it actually feel like in your body to say this matters to me and then do it anyway? And so I kind of built a little workshop out of that. And now I'm like, uh, where else can I take this? I think this is important. And the kids who stayed around at the end were 5 fifth grade boys, and they broke our hearts wide open and were just so beautiful. One of them looked right into my eyes with tears in his eyes, but like deeply unapologetic about being quote unquote emotional. And he said, "What advice would you have for an 11-year-old who wants to do something about the ocean?"
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, "Say more." And he was like, "Because I am quite worried about the fish and the other sea life, but I don't know what I can do as an 11-year-old." And I was like, "Well, first of all, I see you. Do you want a hug? Second of all, there is obviously some like quick searching on the internet, whether it's you or your parents, of like quick, easy ways for kids to get involved, right? Maybe a beautification project on the beach and like picking up trash, and your physical body actually doing something useful will feel good. But then there's this third thing, which actually ties into the final chapter of my book, where I offer this Venn diagram that really like had a major impact on me, which is 2 circles. One that says, what breaks your heart the most about the world? A wildly large
Yeah.
question, right? And the other is where your skill set
Yeah.
lies. And that the overlap is what you should be doing. And I feel like there's a number of cliches culturally around this, but there was something very specific when I saw that about what breaks your heart the most about the world. So here's this boy, and I'm like, well, what do you love that could help? And he said, oh my God, direct quote. He said, could animation help the ocean?
Oh my God, I love it.
But really, what I want to answer your actual question, which is yes, I work with high school girls largely through an organization called Democracy, which is local in LA and also scaling nationally, and finds girls or female identifying kids who are not in a position to naturally be championed by their schools or their homes, and pays them $15 an hour to participate as cohorts in these ongoing trainings to acknowledge their inner spark of leadership and flame it. What I find to be one of the most useful things with them is this conversation about you are the new sound of power and what that actually means. The ways in which we've picked up habits to sound like our friends. And instead of getting shamey about that, right? Why do I say like? Why do I have this accent? Why have I done this to why have I disadvantaged myself this way? What is the self-sabotage? Why can't I hack it? Which women in business say to themselves all the time as well, right? Noticing those thought patterns and going, hold on. What if I am the new sound of power? What if my voice reflects the life I've actually lived, the things that have been in my control and the things that haven't? And that I decide as an act of leadership and as an act of activism to own all the parts. That is power.
Absolutely.
And it will, of course, sounding how you actually sound will turn some ears off, right? This is the bias training we have to simultaneously do so that the burden isn't always on the folks who sound quote unquote different. And when we sound like ourselves and we embrace it in a sort of mischievous way, right? Like we walk into a room and we're like, I'm not going to change how I sound, or I'm going to allow the version of me that I love to show up here. We are actually more likely to get yeses. We're more likely to have people hear us because we're actually doing connection instead of protection.
Mm-hmm. And what comes up for me whenever I hear you talk about this is how the way we sound in our lives and in our own heads is really, I think, determinative of our own self conception,
Yeah, 100%.
right? It's so tied to who we think we are and who we actually are.
I happen to know from my position as someone who's coached and strategized with a whole bunch of people, from movie stars and CEOs of billion-dollar companies to fifth graders, that when we give ourselves a new sense of permission around how we talk, our world opens up, right? And not just our world opens up because we get invitations to things, but our world opens up because we are showing up differently. We have a posture of take me seriously. I'm the new sound of power. That is a posture that is world changing.
Yeah. So, one of the things I wanted to chat with you about is how having that sense of identity, that, radical self acceptance is a thing that I think as adults we come to usually as a result of some sort of challenge or crisis, right? Maybe it's burnout, maybe it's some traumatic experience, and you kind of do the work to say, okay, well, this is who I am. I'm going to stop judging myself and I'm going to be who I am, right? I'm going to be unapologetically me. And one of the things I'm so interested in doing, and I know you are as well, is giving those tools to young people, right? So we can kind of break this cycle of them ending up in the conditions where they're going to need to seek out those tools later.
Yeah, right. It makes me think of, because you also talked about this before, and I think we're going there. It makes me think of this, what's his name, Brooks, who writes for the New York Times, the idea, David Brooks, about the two mountains, right? And that for so many of us, that first mountain is the seeming success that our society slash parents slash whatever institutions have told us we need to pursue. And we go up that mountain and then we reach the top and we're like, oh yay, I made it to the top. Look how successful I am. Look how accomplished. And then we realize there's nowhere to go once you're at the top of a mountain but down. And that the top doesn't feel good and that the air is too thin. Now I'm like really, really stretching the metaphor. But the reality is, not everybody. And I think what you're saying is that there's a hope that really not everybody has to do that first mountain before they find that there's a second mountain that feels much more aligned with their real purpose in life.
And I love that you use the word alignment, because I think that's what it's about, right? Coming to alignment with who you really are on the inside.
Yeah. Because obviously that first mountain is the external validation, right? Which is so understandable. I mean, like, humans are communal. We are looking all around to understand what the rules are. And that moment that you described, that moment when we're like, whether it's burnout or grief or trauma or whatever, when we're like, wait, let me do things differently. Yeah, that is when we're like, what if I stop looking outside and start looking inside? And introducing those tools earlier, doesn't mean we can help people avoid anything that looks like a first mountain, but it is at least offering a certain discernment.
Yes. You have more of a choice instead of just
Yeah.
being swept along on
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
right? So I love that about your work and kind of your message. And I think in whatever small ways, it's what I'm trying to do as well with families, and help them see that, yes, there may be a mountain to climb in terms of a school you want to go to or whatever. But enrolling your child in their own adulthood means helping them know who they are, so that they don't get just automatically chewed up by the machine or funneled into this or that industry that may or may not make sense for them. So I'm reading this book right now that I mentioned to you before. It's called Poison Ivy, and it's basically about how Ivy League and other such elite schools really just reproduce elite society, elite class. And one of the statistics that has really got me torn up right now is about how kids go into college idealistic, hardworking, thinking they're going to change the world. And then they come out all wanting to work on Wall Street or consulting or technology, not doing the things that they thought they were going to go in doing. And granted, what do teenagers know about the world, right? They're learning, we're trying things out, minds change, certainly. But the picture that this author painted was really a very dark and compelling portrait of a machine, quite literally a machine that sucks kids in and spits them out as talent for these different industries.
It's like the actual anatomy of how that first mountain thing gets planted in everybody.
Exactly. And I was curious, you went to one of these schools, as did I, and you managed to avoid that getting sucked into that. And I kind of want to hear a little bit about your experience with that.
Isn't that interesting? I'm curious about myself too now that you say this, because I wonder actually if it was that it didn't occur to me to actually go through the rigmarole of the iBanking and the, consulting recruitment process, because I didn't think I would be good at it. But, to give myself a little more credit than that, I really had decided when I was 10 in that Redwood Grove, I'm going to be an actress. And it shifted, obviously. I mean, y'all heard my story, but it shifted in these really organic ways, not because I felt pressure. And part of that, I have to say, is my parents, my dad's an academic. He's an astrophysicist. And my mom has a law degree and did work in Washington, D.C. before she married my dad and got, lured to the West Coast, where there was a lot less of the type of work she wanted to do. But despite them both being very academically inclined, they're also huge patrons of the arts. And not just patrons like money givers, but like enthusiasts. Like, they understand that art is culture, that like storytelling matters as much, if not more, than anything else. So I really grew up with some good folks who I did not feel like I had to prove anything to upon graduation from Princeton.
What a gift. That was not my experience.
It's not a lot of people's. I mean, right? Like, so much of the work of public speaking coaching, which is, foundationally kind of what I do, is undoing a lot of these stories that aren't just cultural, but specifically from our parents, or specifically from our first job, maybe, or our boyfriend even, that basically was like, if you want to get taken seriously, here's the extremely narrow way in which you need to show up in the world.
Yes.
And I already grew up in a weird enough, iconoclastic enough household that I had a lot of suspicion around that narrative, even in school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a lesson in modeling for our young ones what living a full life looks like. So as our time comes to a close here, what are some things you would like to leave our audience with, and how can we learn more about what you do and maybe get some of it into our lives?
I mean, the main thing is that I think this book I wrote, is for teenage me. It's for teenage all of us. I had this experience I write about in the introduction of losing my voice in my early 20s, and I wasn't sick, and it happened over many months. And it turns out I had picked up a habit of talking a tiny bit lower than my body's optimum pitch. And I went back to my speech pathologist now 20 years later, who helped me then. And she says, this is what all young women who come into her office are dealing with. They are talking unnaturally low. And I think it's a symbol of what we're really talking about here, right? There are all kinds of ways that society is telling us, here's a quick fix to get taken seriously. And I'm saying, with no shame, with so much love, I think there's a better way, both to speak up in the moments that matter, and also just like this posture of I belong here. This room might not have been made for me, like literally not built with me in mind, but I'm here now. That I would love to arm our younger people with, as really my own social experiment of, can we change what power sounds like, what it looks like, and what it acts like in our lifetime? Because we know every institution needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to tell us where we can learn more about you?
Sure. Starting in January, I'm going to have my own Substack called How to Show Up. But in the meanwhile, if you want to get on my newsletter, go to samarabay.com.
Great. And I'll link that all in the show notes. Samara, thank you so much. This was great.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
There you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Just a program note, we are going to be taking a break. And this will be our last episode of 2023. And we won't resume again until February of 2024. I hope that you get some time to maybe detox from things that are stressing you out, and really connect with the people you care about most over the holidays and at the beginning of the new year. I always think that's such a great way to set the tone for the year. So we'll see you in February. Take care, everybody.